Hello, Creative DC. How are we doing today? I like that. I don't feel the need to repeat it. That was a good, appropriate amount of energy, all things considered. We have arrived at the season in our great city where no matter where you go, you will be cold inside. And every facilities manager is fighting a lose-lose battle. Be patient with them. Welcome to our May event. How many of you are here at Creative Mornings for the first time? Lovely. Welcome, welcome. And how many of you have never been in this building? I love it. That's great. Part of the appeal of this community is getting access to spaces in DC that might be new to you. We'll get more on that in a second, but for those, hey, there's a little bug on this flower in front of me. Hey, buddy, you came with the flower, didn't you? For those who have not been here before, Creative Mornings is a global monthly breakfast lecture series. All over the world, people just like you are doing this thing right now. Some of them do it on the third Friday, some on the first, some on the second, some on the fourth, but we do it on the third. It was founded by Tina Roth Eisenberg in New York City and founded as a means to provide continuing education and inspiration for creative professionals without a cost barrier. Because how many of you have ever tried to go to a conference? So Tina decided to start this off in her office in New York, in her studio, and 14 years later it has ballooned into a 32-country effort and initiative. It's a beautiful thing, and we're a part of it. Our chapter is 11 years old this year, which is great. We are one of the OG in this global community. None of this happens without our local partners here in DC. Our title sponsor this year is Bittersweet Creative. I work for Bittersweet Creative. I am biased. We are a full-service creative agency that does everything, but everything we do with a spirit of rejecting cynicism, defying apathy, and celebrating good. It's really hard sometimes. I am a cynical person who tends towards apathy and sometimes ignores the good because it's better and more fun to complain about the bad. But I'm grateful to work at a place that supports communities like this with the spirit that we do. If you are a freelancer or a contractor in any design sort of medium, hit me up. We are always looking to expand our roster. Just send an email to obi@bittersweetcreative.com. Also, we have a nonprofit storytelling arm that's always looking for stories of good in the world. So if you know a person or organization or community that's doing something beautiful in a world that is pretty ugly sometimes, please go to that link and nominate them, and more to come. Other partners, Plants Alive. Who likes plants? It's wonderful. If you didn't raise your hand, let's talk later. That's a weird thing not to like. I once dated someone who didn't like music. Yeah, in hindsight, that was probably the first and only red flag necessary, but carried on for a year and a half anyways. Plants Alive is one of our partners this year that has made a lot of things possible. If you've ever been to an event and seen that we have ASL interpretation when we need it, that's been provided by Plants Alive. I'm a big fan of asking people to volunteer their time because that's what we need to do in this world sometimes to create communities like this, but I'm pretty adamant about never asking anyone to volunteer their craft because that's just a different thing. So we make sure that our ASL interpreters are compensated. Plants Alive makes that possible. Also, Charlestown AV. If you look at the wonderful, strapping, handsome gentleman there in the gray polo in the back with the camera, post-COVID, or pre-COVID, sorry, we recorded and streamed all of our events for people who weren't here to watch after the fact. Post-COVID, it was impossible to find an AV company who would meet us where we were, and where we were was broke, and help us provide that as we returned. And then this wonderful, wonderful angel, Chris, reached out to me, and he met me right there in my inbox and said, "Hey, I'd love to do this for you. We do this in Boston, and we'd love to do this in this community." So they provide this service entirely for free, which is nuts because it's time, it's gear, it's effort, it's energy, and it makes this thing work beyond this room. So very grateful for Charlestown. And if any of you have, excuse me, any AV needs for your work, for events, please don't hesitate to reach out to me and I'll connect you to him. or just walk directly up to him after this and connect with him yourself. And lastly, we get to inhabit, not even arguably, definitively some of the most beautiful spaces in the city, and we have a lot of beautiful spaces in the city. I'm always very, very grateful to be in a place when I talk to other city hosts who are like, we're really having a hard time securing the elementary school gym. And I'm like, yeah, yeah, me too, I guess. Not shout out to elementary school gyms, we need them, we love them, but I'm just grateful that we've never really had that problem in DC, and it's because of partners like Sixth and I. And I'm gonna just take a moment to let Robin Farber come up on stage and talk a little bit about this beautiful historic building that we're in. Yeah?
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Robin Farber, Assistant Director of Rentals, Operations, and Events at Sixth and I. We've had the pleasure of hosting Creative Mornings gatherings since 2014, and we're happy to welcome this vital series back into our space. For those of you who may be new to Sixth and I, this building dates back to 1908. It was a synagogue for 45 years, then home to an AME church for 50. When the church relocated and put the building up for sale, the highest bid was from someone who wanted to turn it into a nightclub. Within 24 hours, 3 local real estate developers got together to save the building. For the past 20 years, we've served as a center for arts, entertainment, ideas, and Jewish life. Our mission is to inspire more meaningful and fulfilling lives through an unexpected mix of experiences that embrace the multifaceted identities of those we serve. In addition to our public programming, our space also hosts private events, conferences, life cycle events, concerts, gatherings like the one we're hosting today. So if you or your organization might be interested in renting our space, feel free to connect with me for more information. This is an exciting time for Sixth and I because we're celebrating a milestone anniversary of 20 years. As a nonprofit, the support of people who attend our programs and believe in our work is crucial to keeping us going. So if you'd like to help us toast our 20th anniversary, we'd be so grateful if you'd make a symbolic donation of $20 for 20 years. There are QR codes on the back of the pews that you can scan to make a donation easily through Venmo. Thank you again for coming, and I'll turn it back over to Obi.
Love it here, love this team. Also, just like all our core volunteers can attest, I love the generosity of any venue. Some venues' generosity comes with a slight level of trepidation. This is not one of them. They are very beautiful and wonderful to work with and make our lives very easy and turnkey as a team of volunteers. So thank you all again for doing everything that you do for us and with us. And speaking of that team of volunteers, one, they all look so great, don't they? But they work even better than they look. It's crazy. That was a weird sentence structure. I hated that. Sorry about that, everybody. None of this happens without volunteers. No one on our team is paid. These are our core volunteers. They've probably reached out to you at some point for something. They've served you coffee. They've greeted you at the door. And then you've met our day of volunteers who make the actual events themselves happen. Thank you to all of them. Make sure you say thank you to all of them as you move about. And if you ever want to be one of them, please reach out to Amari, who is the strapping young man at the top right corner there, who's currently in Turkey having the time of his life and not here with us. So shout out to Turkey. Like I said, a global community. There are a lot of people in this community. And I always put this slide up because it truly is sort of sticky in an interesting way. So if you are ever traveling to another sort of city or country and you're curious about what's going on in that community in the creative space, you might have found yourself in that place on a Creative Mornings Friday, and you should definitely attend. All of the events are publicly posted on creativemornings.com for all the cities. And then if you're ever sort of moving, we've got a few people that are moving and relocating to other cities, and I've been able to connect them with the hosts in those other cities just so they have sort of a soft, friendly, and familiar place to land. So if that's you, let me know. We can make that connection happen. And this community expands online as well in the form of field trips that you can attend. They're led by individuals just like you, anywhere around the world, and they're virtual field trips if you want to spend more time on Zoom. If you don't, ignore that slide. How many of you were here last month at our spicy event at Kennedy Center? Yeah, spicy was fun. And that's the end of that slide. Every month, if you've never been here before, we speak to a specific theme. The themes are selected the year prior by the chapters. I actually just voted on the themes for next year that were sent to my inbox, and I almost missed the voting. This month's theme was selected and illustrated by our chapter in San Antonio, Texas. For those who don't know, I am from San Antonio, Texas, so shout out to San Antonio. No love? Got it. Cool. Great. I'm gonna leave. But vibrancy and vibrant sort of speaks to a lot of things. It speaks to a vibrancy of spirit. I wore color today. I don't often wear color, but it felt appropriate and necessary today to wear color. Yeah. And I think one of the things I love about our city, our community, is we are a vibrant one. I think it's sometimes underrepresented, under-heralded, but we are a vibrant creative community in Washington, D.C. And when I was thinking about who we might bring in to speak to this, as you know, I try to avoid the more on-the-nose interpretations of these themes because that's easy, and why do the easy thing? I have known this person from a distance for a while, but it took approximately a year and a half before we actually got coffee together. A year and a half of planning coffees. How many failed attempts? 4, 5? Doesn't matter. It happened when it needed to happen. Josh Cogan is a photographer, an Emmy-winning photographer. Let me say that out loud one more time. An Emmy-winning photographer. He is an anthropologist and ethnobotanist. He is a talented and gifted writer and speaker. And he's also just one of those people who his presence allows you to exhale. You know what I'm talking about? They're people who you can just breathe around. And I think we assume everyone is those people, but that's not it at all. It's not until you find yourself sitting at a coffee table at Dolcezza with a stranger and you realize, oh, I'm fully taking deep breaths. This guy is safe. And he really is one of those people. I think his creative spirit lends itself to that. I think his posture of acceptance and openness lends itself to that. And Josh is currently doing a lot of work to both promote and expand and expose the people who see his work to different types and levels of vibrant life on this earth. And without further ado, I'm going to let him come on stage and talk to us about that a little bit. Josh Cogan, everybody.
That's helpful. Is this mic on? Yeah. So thank you. I aim to take a breath. Sometimes I get a little constricted and anxious when I speak in front of people, or especially bigger groups and there's a microphone. So I'm just gonna start with a promo video because I was doing a presentation. Somebody made a promo video for me, and I thought that would be cool. It's a couple minutes, but it just kind of contextualizes the work a little bit, so I don't have to speak as much about it up top, and then we'll hop right into it. When I first met Paran at his home in central Delhi and we went to go visit him, he looked at me and he said, "Please make a recording of this place. Please make a video, photograph, document something, because soon it's not going to exist anymore."
And see how the hand is quicker than the eye. As far back as history goes, we find that conjuring and magic tricks have always fascinated human beings of all ages and of all classes.
Estimates about 3 million people live in slums.
The demand for high-rise apartments is
To
increasing.
an outsider, this might not look like much, but to the families of
Devastation may be necessary if we're going to
Delhi was the rage of many tragedies.
लेकिन वो घर मेरा जीने के लिए नहीं है, वो सिर्फ मरने के लिए।
तो आगे बढ़ने वाले को हम देख लेंगे, हम क्या चीज़ है हम उसको बता देंगे। छोटे मोटे
So we just pulled up at a site that they just probably logged this last week. We were coming to look for some of the bigger trees that were left. You know, only 2.7 left of the large old growth here. Any more of the big tree stuff. And so we were coming here trying to find some other trees to do some photography on and to do some storytelling, and this is what we were left with. This 800-year-old tree you see right there, just cut probably in the last week. I mean, just look at this. I mean, just look at these rings. Just giant. So this is it. This is all unceded land, heavily logged. What do you do? I appreciated when my friend, come down a little bit. I appreciated when my friend made that reel because it helped me kind of step back from my own work and understand what I'm trying to do. Sometimes it's really hard as an artist to kind of reflect your work from the outside in and understand what you're trying to say with the work that you're doing. What you saw there was a film I made in 2013 called Tomorrow We Disappear, which was exploring how India's last magician colony was being displaced for high-rises. This was a community of acrobats and puppeteers and yogis and storytellers that had settled in West Delhi in the 1950s as Delhi kind of came on the world map and were taken around the world to show their arts and their crafts and the folk traditions of India, and essentially kind of settled there over time. And then sometime around the early 2000s, they were said, you got to leave, you don't live here anymore. In a way, it was like the destruction of magic. Then I started kind of working a lot more in ecological storytelling, and I could see that we were doing the same thing there, that there was this way that we were kind of destroying land and losing the magic of place as well. And the question that I had is, how can I communicate the ideas of these stories or the experiences I'm having there when I'm living with magicians in West Delhi, when I'm in an old growth forest, when I'm working with communities in DC or any other place I go, and help people understand each other, be a bridge to understanding, be a bridge to belonging with each other. Anyone who spends time with communities that are different than their own understands that it deepens you. It helps you expand the notion of what being alive and being human is. That just by the nature of being human, we get kind of stuck in our context. And our job, I feel like, ultimately is to kind of broaden our context and have a deeper understanding of the world, because it not only deepens our own lives, but it broadens our hearts. And it makes the world a better place for everybody. And so ultimately, when I look back at my storytelling, this is what I was trying to do, is how can we best see each other? How can we best hear each other? And as a storyteller, it seems like the sacred task often is to be a bridge or a conduit to that understanding. And now I'm going to take you, let me tell you a little bit on the journey I'm going to take you on. In the early 2000s, I started working on some stories for National Geographic around logging. I kind of tripped into these stories. I was doing some cultural storytelling in Southeast Alaska. And that ended up putting me on some logging sites. And as a result of that, that led to an assignment that I did about 10 years later that really showed me kind of some of the ecological devastation that we were facing as a human race. As I kind of deepened my understanding of that work, I understood that it was really a context of how we understood land, and then later how we understood ourselves. And so I'm going to try to make an arc for you. It's a bit of a broad arc, and how I took my storytelling work into a deeper understanding of the living world, and then how we understand ourselves as human. And specifically as men. I'm going to speak a little bit as a man and to men in this room, and the work I try to do as community interventions with men. So in 2013, I was in Southeast Alaska, and I was working on a story on First Nations communities and the cultural histories of Southeast Alaska in a town called Ketchikan. And I was there for about the fourth night. I was a little bit like tired. I'd been working really long days. They weren't really telling me what I was doing. It was actually like really, really, really long days. And one night they said, listen, we're going to get you up at 6 in the morning and we're going to put you on a helicopter and we're going to send you out to a logging site. You know, logging was a big part of the history of Southeast Alaska. And I said, okay, well, getting in a helicopter sounds cool. And so I got up at 6 in the morning and we went in this helicopter, and I actually remember we flew through this rainbow, which was pretty cool because if you see a rainbow from a helicopter, it's actually a circle. And we're kind of heading to this logging site, and I don't know what to expect when I get there. And when I arrive, we kind of land on the site. That's the only way you can get to this logging site called Mackenzie Inlet. And a guy in a truck picks me up. His name's Dennis. And he says, all right, I'm going to take you up to the cut block. So he takes me up to the cut block, and I start seeing men working on this tree. Now, this is about 10 minutes after I arrived. What's hard to get is that these cedars are about 8 to 10 feet long. Now, for the most part, I grew up in the East Coast. I grew up in suburban Atlanta. You know, I'd seen kind of redwoods on TV, but I really hadn't been to an old-growth forest. So this was the first time I was seeing really ancient forests. We're talking about 10,000-year-old forests that are left over from the Ice Age that formed over a long period of time, and the communities that live around them in deep relationship with them. So the first time I'm seeing these trees and I'm in this state of wow, I see these guys cutting on these trees. Now, if you're at an active cut block, it's pretty clear all the way up the hill until you get to the tree. But since we're rushing and I'm a photographer and they take me to the cut block and I kind of want to look to know what I'm doing, I start shooting, right? Because you kind of want to get the action. You don't know how much of this you're going to see or not see or how many times you're going to see this. And these loggers are working on the tree. And as I said, about 10 minutes later, this tree starts falling. So this is actually the moment that I'm seeing. And I'm just shooting it, right? Because that's what you do. You're supposed to, I have to get the moment. And then this tree falls. And I don't really know how to express to you the sound or the feeling of seeing a tree that size fall, but it shakes the ground. It groans. Water shoots out of the base. You get a sense that this living object, this dinosaur, you know, this grand scale of life has just been taken down. And it's deeply unnerving. And I think once it landed, you ever have that moment where you see something really intense, but you're not really kind of contextualizing or taking in or let it hit, and then it hits you a little bit later? I think that happens a lot in our experience as human beings. That's what happened to me here. And I was like really shaken, and I was just surrounded by the loggers, and Dennis, the guy who had brought me up the hill, and I didn't want to like look overly disturbed because, you know, there's already a little suspicion of kind of photographers and this type of stuff. This isn't work that is really photographed a lot. And Dennis looks over at me, and he kind of just gives me a gentle look, and he says, if you don't feel something when that happens, something's wrong with you. And when he said that, I had this really deep exhale, right? There was a validation of something that was going on internally that I was having trouble expressing. What Dennis did there in a moment is he made a room for my experience, right? I felt really narrowed and kind of hemmed in and hurting and scared and didn't really know how to kind of speak to what I was saying or if it was okay to speak to what I was saying. And I didn't expect this, some 60-year-old logger to say, it's okay to feel that way. And there was this moment that I could take that breath that Obi was talking about. Now, these logging sites, I ended up going to them years and years afterwards and ended up leading to assignment work. They look like Mordor. Right? Often what we see of logging, most of us don't think that old growth logging is still happening. I think perhaps now a little bit more, but when I arrived there in 2013, 2018, everyone was like, no, they're still cutting down these huge trees. They're still cutting down these huge trees. It's still happening. And when you see a landscape that is rich and beautiful and alive and filled with ferns and magic, I mean, it looks like everything you could imagine it to be. They look like places out of fantasy. And then you come to this and you see what's happening and you realize kind of the scale of destruction. Now, for the most part, here on the East Coast, we don't really know that unless you've really been to an old growth forest and then you've been to a clear cut, you don't really have context to the level of destruction. And so it was right there in front of me, right? Because you could walk up to the cut block and go into the old growth forest that was 10,000 years old, and then you'd walk out to these areas and you'd see what would be happening. And trying to contextualize this loss is really hard. So it's a little hard to see in this shot. I wish sometimes I could kind of flip the screen vertically. This is about 120-foot spruce sitting alone in the middle of a clear cut. And I tried to light it this way from a logging road up top. Sometimes they'll leave these trees because they have an eagle's nest in them or something. Or they're a snag tree, or they're using it to tie these kind of logging lines that they drag the other logs up from. But this one was remaining. And so I just started thinking, how do I communicate? You know, back to this original point, how do I communicate the story? How do I bring people into the story? How do I kind of share the effect of what was happening? And I got a little depressed, right? Because one gets depressed when we're faced with the scale of devastation in the world. This is in California. This was on a camping trip with my wife. And we were kind of walking through a forest. I think it was a state park. And we saw this old base of either a sequoia or a redwood. We don't know, right? And you can see the second growth coming up. Kind of the monocultures, because what happens when you clear cut is all the trees grow at the same time. It's not like an ancient forest where everything is kind of strange and develops in its own ways, and life is kind of created and has its own context and is constantly evolving. But this gives you a kind of a context to where I was feeling about this world and how I was kind of thinking about land and how I was thinking about how do you communicate stories when people don't even have context to what has been lost, right? Most of us don't have any context of what a raw and beautiful and natural and fully flowing and expressive ecosystem is, and an ecosystem that is vibrant. You know, this is where I'm starting to bring in this world, as I was thinking about this world. When you come to monocultures, it's like beige, right? It's just like a color. And you're like, huh. But when you're in these other places, there's like a full throat to it. There's like a song that they sing. The more and more you work with people that really work closely aligned, well, they'll talk about the full vibration of a place. So I started thinking about how do we kind of orient around land? How do we understand land? And I started thinking about this thing that one of my mentors, Farley, told me is structure determines behavior. You ever guys have a situation where like you kind of feel like you're in a different job, but the same things are happening, but maybe you kind of chose the same kind of boss, or you were dating somebody and then you were dating somebody else, but the same problems are happening. Part of those problems are you, and part of those are probably because you're choosing structures that feel familiar that are going to determine outcomes, right? So a lot of how we think about the world is determined, or a lot of how we act in the world is determined about how we think about the world, and how we experience the world, and how we organize the world. And our brain is kind of a pattern recognition system, right? It's software. So I want to kind of talk a little bit about this, and I'm going to kind of show you a couple of slides here. So this is out at the logging sites. Also at McKinsey Inlet, I think. You can get a sense of the scale. You can see the guy cutting the tree. And this is in Panama. This is in Gunayala, one of the First Nations community that lives off the isthmus of the east coast of Panama. There's a chain of islands. I'd spent a lot of time there, I think around 2004. And this is me. I was following a couple of the medicine persons. I'd done my graduate degree in ethnobotany, and I was really interested in kind of biocultural medicines, particularly how plants were used, not specifically the compounds within them, but how we treated plants and how we found plants and understood them. And I would go in every day with Nestor into the jungle. We would canoe onto the mainland, and we'd go in there, and we'd kind of go into these deep forests. And the very first day we're in there, he kind of walks up to the first tree, and he stands by it, and he kind of looks at it, and he touches it, and he speaks it. There's kind of different derivations of First Nations Guna language. They have like kind of a modern Gunya and an ancient Gunya, and he speaks in the ancient Gunya to the tree, and then he takes a little bit, And I was like, well, what was going on there? He was like, how would you like it if somebody walked up to you and started hacking at you without asking? And I was like, oh, that's like an obvious question, right? But it's also the difference between subject and object, right? If we look at this picture, tree is object. If we look at this picture, tree is subject. I am living, you are living, we are in relationship together. Now, we are in relationship with everything around us, whether we choose to believe that or not, or whether we can conceptualize the framework of relationship that we have with them. But this relationship is very different than this relationship. This relationship recognizes peer, parity, equanimity, equality, beingness of something else. And I think for me, it was a big shift. I think I always felt that the world was more alive and animist and sacred and magical. And in fact, if I look at the kind of the early stages of my work, it was always like this pursuit of magic, like literally on the nose, going to live with magicians, or trying to find what was more magical and amazing about the world. Because I grew up in suburban Atlanta, no offense to suburban Atlanta, but everything was like named after the things that had been killed. You know, the neighborhoods were Lockridge Forest or Deer Meadows. My mom is here, she's kind of like laughing at me, right? Like you had to go scrambling to find some magic around there, you know? There was a lot of magic at home, Mom. There really was. She taught me magic in a lot of ways, but like the world outside, it was like flat and strip malls and everything, right? It was just tough to find that magic, that really vibrant aliveness. And so if I kind of think about me sitting in that tree kind of depressed, or I think about the state I was in, it was like, how do we get past this point? How do we move into shifting people's understanding of place? How do we shift our own understanding of place? How do I shift my own understanding of place? How do I not get kind of locked in these structures that I'm inhabiting or part of, right? Which is something I think all of us do as artists. We're always like, we're kind of like pushing against the structure. We're like, what's going on here? This doesn't feel right. I need something more, right? If anything, it's like we're always trying to do that together. And so I think this process that I'm describing ultimately is the creative process, right? It's like, how do I get more out of this rock that I feel that I'm confined by? And so I think about this phrase a lot, which I think it was, if you guys have ever heard of the meditation or Dharma teacher Tara Brach, I don't know if this came from her. I've heard a couple teachers say it says, the mind creates the abyss and the heart crosses it. Right? The mind just like is really contained and it has a ton of structure, and it like, again, comes to this idea of a pattern recognition system, right? Because if the doors of perception were blown off, we would have light streaming all around us. Angels would be singing from heaven, right? We would kind of be vibrating and floating. We would have so much sensory input to like where we are as humans that we wouldn't actually know what to do. We couldn't even talk. You know, there's one of the famous kind of spiritual teachers that says, you know, ultimately you just kind of walk up to strangers that fall on their feet at bow, because you would recognize like the godliness and the goodness of like the inherent beauty of every person around you. And I think the same thing goes for forests and trees and people and forests and all the beings around. And so our mind kind of narrows that down a little bit, because otherwise we'd be overwhelmed all the time, right? We just kind of, we tighten up. But our job as artists is actually to kind of break over those patterns. Now, we also know that we have the mind and then we have the heart. And the heart is really kind of capable of all sorts of things that surprise us, right? It's capable of kind of meandering in ways that we could never understand. And it's also capable of kind of resonating with other people in different ways than our minds oftentimes allow us to. I'm just going to play this video here. Actually, I'll go back to the top and let you guys get the volume ready. So what I started is I started kind of going in and working with different communities where I could figure out how we can interact with the forest and how we can interact with land in different ways. So I'll give you the setup to this video. So I started working with a company called PlantWave. And PlantWaves creates this really cool device, if you've ever seen it. But basically, you could hook up a little device with some electrodes to a plant, and you could hear the biorhythms of the plant. And I was talking to the guy, Joe. I know it's not like a novel thing to just kind of throw out there and then skim past, but But that's Joe's talk. I don't get to give Joe's talk. Joe's an amazing person too. But I was talking to Joe, and he really like understood kind of the aliveness of the living world. And he's like, I created this device because I wanted to have people able to come in contact with the world in a different way. And I wanted them to be able to recontextualize the living world in a different way. So he created this device that makes these crazy songs. And I said, hey, I've been tracking this idea that 1 out of every 3 plant species is disappearing. Nobody's really talking about it, mostly because we have this thing called plant blindness. This is a whole other talk, but you may have heard it. The idea being that like we don't really engage plants because they're static, and unless they're poison ivy or like we can eat them, we don't really think about them. They just kind of sit in the background. You guys think about the famous Kehinde Wiley Obama portrait. Obama's great, but you're not thinking about all those plants in the background, right? They're just background. And so I think about how can we understand plants and recontextualize and bring their aliveness to us in different ways. So I reached out to Joe. I said, you have this device. What if we go and profile people that are working closely and directly in relationship with plants? And we tell their stories and we recontextualize that experience of plants and human and the way they relate. And Joe was like, good, go for it. So the first thing I did is I started working with a First Nations community up in Vancouver Island and Dr. Susan Simard. If you know Dr. Susan Simard's work, she's very well known for essentially kind of the idea of mother trees, the wood wide web, the talking forest. Even if you've like seen Avatar, that's essentially kind of rooted in her research, right? She was the first one that was really kind of, at least from a Western science system, contextualizing the fact that plants communicate, and particularly trees and old growth forests communicate. So I want to show a little bit of this work of going on to land with Dr. Simard.
We're exhausted as a human species. We're tired and we're consuming non-stop. But in Kwakwaka'wakw belief, you go into the forest and at any moment you could find a tree and you can develop a relationship with that tree. And you can, set up camp and fast and bathe and meditate until you reach a point where you're tapping into this energy where after a certain point you'd be able to understand the language of the animal. You would actually hear the songs coming from the trees. And we're at a point now where science is starting to catch up to that, to understand what we've been talking about for thousands of years. Now we can measure vibrations, that are coming from these great ancient species.
I grew up in a settler family. We were, a family of horse loggers who had settled in areas that had been taken from local nations, and those nations were put on reserves to make way for settler families. It's a history that I came from, and I've tried to come to terms with, and never really understood. And at the same time, I was so wrapped up in what we were doing on the land, like this oppression of the forest, this disconnecting of the forest, the logging of the forest, and seeing it ripped apart. And that was my horror. And I didn't really know that at the same time we were doing the same thing to the First Nations people right across from where I live.
Removing people from the land for resource extraction was the worst thing that ever happened globally. in order to really move beyond that, we have to start talking about land and what land means to us as a human species.
A lot more to kind of share in this work. And there's a lot in this story with Randy and Suzanne and the communities that we're bringing around of artists and storytellers and scientists, community makers, culture bearers. And what's happening is that we've been going every summer and kind of gathering in circle and talking about how do we understand each other better? How do we work together as opposed to working in individual silos? And how do we do it in relationship to the places that we're talking about and relationship to each other in different ways? And the heart of this work is this idea is that we cannot protect, heal, or grow in ourselves what we cannot see. A lot of the problem of how we experience land or relate to the things around us is they become object. And unless we really can help it move into a deeper knowing, a deeper way of experiencing land, experiencing each other, that is informed more by the heart and not just by the mind, not just by the structures that we feel beholden to, the more we can actually protect and save the things that we really care about. And so I started thinking about that with the work. So not only, and I'll point out quickly that that film was scored, all those sounds were from the plants, which is kind of cool. I should have told you that before the film. But I also started thinking about how do I kind of illustrate plant communication. And I started thinking about, well, how do other beings experience the plant world? And I started thinking about kind of insects and mycelial networks. And the fact is, if you've kind of looked into some of this work about how plants communicate, is we understand there's all this communication happening all the time. We just can't really visualize it, right? Is that there's bioelectric communication and there's volatile organic compound signaling and all these things, but we can't see it. So I started doing that with my work. And I started shooting with infrared cameras. I started imagining kind of portals in the forest. And I started photographing people in relationship with lands in different ways that made it more vibrant and more alive. And I just got the signal, so I'm going to move to this last piece. Oops, before I do that. Okay, let me pause that right there. So I talked a lot about our relationship with land. But what I realized that it wasn't enough to just understand land in a different way, it was actually understanding ourselves in a different way. And particularly as I was working with these loggers, I realized that there was this way that they thought that was the only way that they could provide for their families. That they were actually going out to these forests because they were deeply healing spaces, the same thing that takes us all to the forest and takes us all to land. But there was only one way to kind of be in relationship at the land. So over the last 5 years, and this is kind of a little bit of a leap, is I started working together with a men's community called Journeyman, and we started bringing men to relate to each other in different ways. The idea is that as men, oftentimes, we only really get to relate to each other in really narrow lanes. That we don't get to show the fullness of who we are. We don't get to show our shame and our grief and all the different things that are happening in our lives. And therefore, we're kind of walking down or around the world in this very kind of limited context of who we are. And so what I'm going to show you in the next couple of slides is some of the work that we do in that community and how I think about that community. Let's see if this...
Maybe at some point in your life you want to make a living amends. Like a living amends means, didn't tell anybody, but I'm doing service and giving to others and maybe going out of my way to help others. Just adding to the positive goodwill aura of the universe, right? Because that's ultimately what it is. Ultimately, amends is saying, it doesn't matter what you did to me. It just matters that I want to forgive you and I want to forgive myself and add to the positive ledger of what's going on in the universe, right? As opposed to the negative resentment, fear, which leads to anger, fighting, lying.
Toby, we have 5 or 10 left? 8. Okay, so it's a perfect amount of time. Let me settle in. I'm going to give myself some belonging right here, because I could feel myself trying to rush through. I'm going to take a breath. So what I'm about to share here are 2 videos from the most recent gathering. So what we tend to try to do is to take groups of men onto land that don't know each other. Some of them do, but most of them don't. And we invite them into a different collective and cultural process with each other. Most men don't have experiences of being with other men in a different way, right? There's this kind of like dance that happens when guys get together. There's this subtle kind of like arms race, even if we're like chill and we're artists, we're like, oh, I just got back from doing this project from this thing, you know? I can feel myself even do it when I'm up here, right? Because like under, I'm trying not to use kind of tag words, but under the culture we're on, the currency for a lot of us is power. Right? That's how we kind of relate in the world. That's how we create safety. In a culture where men actually aren't allowed to talk for safety, we hoard safety in different ways. We hoard it through power, we hoard it through money, we hoard all these things. I'm not going to do too much preaching up with you, but I think implicitly you guys know a little bit what I'm saying. If you're a man, you're creative, a lot of times you can feel this too. You're like, I just want to relate to the world in a different way, but like I'm not actually really allowed to do that. Or when other groups of guys, like this other character of kind of my aspect comes on. And so what we try to do in these groups is invite men to deeper spaces of belonging. I'm relating that to vibrancy. If we think about vibrancy, there's this notion of like full aliveness. But I feel a lot of the ways that we kind of relate in the world are in these very narrow ranges, and that's not fully alive. It's beige, right? It's not powerful, it's not sing, it's not full-throated. And what we have to do is create these kind of cultural containers where new rules apply, or at least we can question the conditioning of the old rules. And there's a real power in just like disrupting the conditioning and seeing what happens. So what I'm going to show you here is 2 videos from something we've been doing that I actually took from Elizabeth Gilbert of this thing called Letter from Fear. And this idea is that men are never really allowed to talk about being afraid. They're certainly not allowed to talk about safety. And if you can address fear along with shame and grief, then you've actually like opened up a whole different way that men can relate to each other. There's a whole different thing if men are talking about their fear in front of each other. That's a whole thing. So maybe they have one person they can say it to, but can they actually speak to it in a group in which they actually feel that that fear is held? So I'm going to give you 2 short little videos.
May 3rd, 2024. Dear David, my name is Fear. I have a few things to tell you. It is okay to make mistakes. Not everyone you meet is going to like you. People you love are going to die. You will probably not write the great American novel, but at least you picked back up your journal. It is okay that you didn't die in Fallujah. And Dan isn't better than you. He just went to heaven first. He's waiting there for you. He says, take your time getting here. Your mom wasn't scared all the time either. She really wanted you to go home so you could watch the girls, so Christine could come back and see Michelle. Fear isn't what it used to be. Your mom figured that out. If there's a lesson, it is don't spend any more time worrying about what you can't control. And just love your family. Every day. I have a way to show you how much your mom loved you. And I'm going to give you a chance to love your kids without any of the extra work. Seriously, sometimes bad things just happen and there's nothing you can do to stop it. I get stronger when you think you have any control over anything. So just let that shit go. I'll give you a chance to learn something from every bad choice you make, every raised voice, every empty threat to the girls to move out. But someday I'll show up to test you and see what you've learned. See you soon. Fear.
Let me show you one more. Well, I don't know if Sam is playing. I was going to show you Sam too, but I don't know if it'll go. So now I'm going to bring it back to vibrancy, and I'm going to bring it back to belonging. The first thing I asked you, I'm a little high again, or the question we put on the name tags is, what makes you feel belonging? So in a way, there's a big responsibility for us to create belonging for people. In a way, that's the greatest thing I feel that we can do nowadays is create fields of belonging. What I realized is that we actually have to make room for another person's experience. For a lot of men, we ask, how you doing? And then we turn away. Or if they start talking about how they're doing, we kind of like lose that presence of attention. And that what happens in these communities is we're actually like helping each other create belonging for each other. And it can only happen in these ways. And so what we're doing ultimately is like being in a certain way so others can also be in that way. So this is where I wanted to kind of return to this idea of vibrance, is the spectrum of being, the way, the bigness that we can be in, or the full expression of ourselves, the fact that I can tell you, I'm a little scared up here. You know, the stats are 40% of people would rather die than speak publicly. I sit somewhere in the middle of that, right? But now you guys can look at me and be like, yeah, it feels a little awkward to be up there, doesn't it? You know? And so now we're in this kind of space of belonging together. I'm doing the same thing Dennis did to me when I was up there watching that big tree fall. There's a lot of tough stuff happening around us all the time right now. We live in a world that is becoming more and more difficult. We can all feel that, right? But if we can't actually talk about it in a real way, in person, it actually becomes hard to create change. You know, a lot of us were flooded with information, we're flooded with opinions, we have all these things kind of going around with us, but we don't actually sit with each other's collective wisdom a lot, right? It's all in these kind of dislocated digital worlds. And so there's a real power in kind of bringing people so we can be together and be in these places of belonging together. And so my challenge to you is like whatever that thing that gives you a sense of belonging, whatever you wrote down on your name tag or however you thought about it, try to be that for someone that you don't know. Try to create that space of belonging. Be that place of refuge or quiet or stillness or non-judgment or softness or whatever it is. I think that's the end of my talk. I don't have like some great wrap up, but the last thing I'll say is the reason I kind of think that I took it from this bridge to the storytelling, where you start with photography as a photographer, and I know we have another photographer here too, is you're doing portraits of people and they're like anxious. You're like, all of a sudden you have this like camera up in front of them and you know, they're a little bit nervous and like there's this kind of thing that you're trying to figure out how to do is like, how do I create belonging for this person? How do I make them feel safe? Well, first I have to feel safe. You know, my nervous system is so dysregulated, they can't calm down, right? And then I started thinking about, well, how do we contextualize work? How do I create like kind of an open example of that? And how do we do that with the world around us? But then how do we really do it in fields of people that we may not understand? How do we do it in deeper ways that may feel challenging to us? This is what we need now more than anything. That's my belief. If we can like allow each other to take the breath, maybe this is a good summation, which is easy sometimes to do with very close friends, but harder to do with people we don't know, then we'll all be a lot better off. That seems like a good place to end. Thank you. A sweet anchor down there. I was like, kept looking it over.
Oh yeah. We've got, hello. Where's Robin? Robin, are we good to answer some questions? Yeah? Okay. We've got some time for some questions, so if anybody has any, just raise your hand and shout them out. Boom.
With the walking, you're coming into this environment where
I think that's curiosity, right? That's one of the things that does belonging, what creates belonging, right? It's like somebody told me once as I was doing this work, it's like you have reverence for everybody. When you're doing this work. My wife would disagree with you when we're fighting. There's not a lot of reverence going on. We'll say over her, but like for the most part, like when I'm working with people, there's an enormous amount of reverence, right? I don't see them as bad. I see them different contextually. They may be doing things that I don't disagree with. Again, like understanding does not mean agreement, And certainly I'm not going to change anyone's behavior by yelling at them or telling them they're bad. Sometimes I'll ask them a little bit of a leading question. When somebody's showing me a video of a big tree falling and they're kind of celebrating it, and I'm like, wow, that's a really big being. And you'll hear them kind of like step back. So I don't know if that answers the question. Yeah. I will totally answer that question afterwards. I have a feeling that's a really long answer. But I will say, again, curiosity. I kept kind of going down the road towards the things that I'm like, I got to do this. What happens around, the basic question is, what's around that corner? Yeah. But I'm happy to speak at length about it. I didn't know if there were other questions. I was like, start talking about the history of the career role. Yeah. So I have a ton of hope. Actually, that really helps me. Sometimes I was like, this should all just be a conversation instead of me talking to you. So the best thing about the journeyman community is like, if you ever think the world is like a difficult or bad place or nobody cares, get around 25 other guys that want to be better like husbands and fathers and like community members and like show up in the world in a different way. You will like leave that space with hope. So I we actually had a group meeting last night. We did the retreat a month ago. Like I am like beaming. I'm overriding with hope. I mean, there's a lot to be sad and scared about, right? Especially living in DC and the times we've been through. But like, I'm amazed by people. People are amazing, and I believe that, over and over. So I think that's where like hope comes from me, It's like I refuse to give up on possibility. Also, optimists and pessimists die the same way. There was a famous guy who said that once. As a father, I don't have the luxury of pessimism. I get really worried a lot, but I can't be hopeless, Yeah.
Last question in the back.
Can you tell us about the magnolia?
Yes. Sorry, I brought it as a comfort object to me, and it created belonging with the woman who was kind of patting me down up front. I'm like holding the flower. I can take it off. So the magnolia, one of the pictures you saw in there, I can probably go back because I don't think it's too far. So this is the Magnolia grandiflora. So I grew up in that, one of the apartment complexes I grew up as a kid, there was a giant magnolia and I used to climb in it all the time. And so when I bought my house in DC, it had this giant magnolia. I still claim it's the biggest magnolia in DC, which when I talk about being a competitive man, that's like kind of a weird statement. But the tree is awesome, and like I built my entire life around the tree, and I think it holds the house and it holds my family, and it like produces these blossoms, and I've had this like amazing relationship with magnolias. So magnolias are like the oldest flowering species on Earth, 330 million years old, older than bees, They used to get pollinated by beetles. I think you already smelled it once. It's kind of awkward. I offer people to smell it. Then I don't want to do it because like it's weird. And then people are like, can I smell it? I'm like, of course. And I can pass this around. Although I have to leave it with the lady at the front when I left, as I promised. And so this is one of my things during the pandemic. And I was stuck at home and I was like, I don't really get to go anywhere. How do I explore plants? I just started photographing the tree in my backyard. And so this is from that tree and it just went into blossom, which is really awesome. And that's the story with the magnolia. And they're just amazing, beautiful creatures.
Josh, you're an amazing, beautiful creature.
Thanks, man.
Thank you so much for your time, for your generosity.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
What would the world look like if more men had magnolia measuring contests instead of... One can only dream, right? How do I wrap it up? How do we wrap it up? Wrap it up. Land the plane. Wrap it up.
Too.
Yeah. Like I said, he's just one of those exhale people. I hope you all had a nice deep exhale today. Josh, I just want to honor you again as an elder in our community. This is Josh's second time on the stage. The first time was our first year, so he's been around and stuck around. You're a cultural worker. You're a healer of communities. Sometimes I look around, especially when I have a speaker like you, I look around the room and like any room in DC, unfortunately, any like volunteer run group, organization, meeting room, we're like one man to every seven women in here. And I just felt like, I don't know, I've been on a long journey to heal my relationship to men because of a broken relationship with a man in my life.
Yeah.
And people like you are genuinely making the world safer and more welcoming and more belonging. And I just love every time I interact with Josh, I just full embrace, hug. There's no need for the act of like the handshake before the hug to validate our masculinity. It's just like, nah. And I think it's super special. I loved your note on magic, and I think this is where I'll end it before we go into our collective silence here. I think we spend a lot of time in our world talking about evil and trying to identify evil and point out evil and call out evil. But evil is not a person. Evil is not a political party. Evil is not a group or a culture group. Evil functionally is the byproduct of a people losing touch with the magic. That's all it is. I mean, it's like how many Harry Potter fans are in the room? Lord of the Rings fans, Golden Compass fans. Literally every story that has ever been written has been telling us since the dawn of time that evil prevails when we lose sight of the magic. And then we have to create these stories of like young avatar children who are the ones who can help us reconnect to the magic again. So just thank you for being an elder in our community who is helping us find that magic. I think that's the only way that we can find our way out. And all of you as creative people, creative professionals, creative appreciators, amateurs, you all bear a burden of hope because of the work that we do, because we are functionally helping people reconnect with that magic again. So please, it's hard out there. We're not stupid. We don't come in here and, woo-woo kumbaya every day believing that it's not as hard as it is out there. We know. But we do what we do in here because it's existential to what we can do and who we can be out there. So I hope you carry that with you. As we do every event, and because Robin is so generous in letting us go a little bit over, we like to seal the time that we have together with just a moment of collective silence. Hustle and bustle city, we're moving a lot. Some of us don't take time to ourselves, with ourselves, and very, very few of us get to take time with one another in silence. I think I've told some people this, but we have a room full of decently new folk who have never been to a Creative Mornings before. I started this practice for myself in 2022, I believe. It was the year that the Roe decision was released or leaked. Was that last year? I don't remember what time it is anymore. But anyways, I showed up, as thousands did, to the Supreme Court and to protest and to just be present in grief with people. And I noticed that the chants that were breaking out for people who presumably are on the same side began to fight and turn towards one another. And it was just this really weird picture of, okay, we functionally want the same thing, but now we're all vying for volume so much that we have now turned on one another. And it was super heartbreaking. It was just a heartbreaking moment. And I had this thought to myself, what would have happened if 8,000 people showed up at the steps of the Supreme Court and just carried their grief silently together? Nothing needed to be said. Like, what would, just curious. I don't even think I have the moral imagination as a child of the millennial generation to even imagine that moment, right? Because all we want to do is scream, because things are scream-worthy. Not to say that it's not worth screaming. I want to scream all the time. But I do believe I start to ask myself, and Josh and I have had this conversation, what's the value of screaming if everyone's screaming? So brought this practice into my life, and because I have the microphone and people call me the host, you guys have to suffer through it as well. So what we're going to do is just 20 minutes of this collective silence. Reflect on the talk, reflect on your week, reflect on gratitudes, reflect on joy, reflect on grief. Bring it all here, whatever you need. Feel the magic and feel the vibration. And then I will break us out whenever that 2 minutes is over, or as you know, whenever I feel like I want to. Everybody take a deep breath in and let it out. 2 minutes starts now.